Hi, my name's Blair Lewis, and this is my special education interviews. The people that I interviewed were my assistant principal, Gail Holder, special education teacher, Jared Shelp, and then Barb Kolb is a para that's in my room during my 6th hour class. The first question I asked was the child find procedures, and I got a really interesting answer just because I work in a high school. I thought maybe most kids had already been found that were in need of special education services, but that is not always the case. So, what happens is students are recommended for this multi tiered system of support, and that is when teachers see some type of deficit or kids are struggling and they recommend them to their administrator to go to this meeting. Our SIT team then meets once a month, and that's administrators, counselors, school psych, and they go over what are the deficiencies of this kid. Is it more of a skill thing, or is it willpower? Is it the kid is just unmotivated and is maybe going through something psychological that needs to be addressed, or is this truly something that is a deficiency in their education? They look at a lot of data. They look at the reading inventory, the MAP scores for the student, the assessment scores for the student, test scores in classes. They look to see, when did this deficiency start? Is it something that occurred in middle school, or from 7th to 8th grade they just completely dropped off, and what happened then, and what type of interventions and accommodations can we do for them now? Can we send them to Hawk Hour, which is a time during the day where they have extra time to meet with teachers? Do they just need more time? Do they need a PACE class, which is more of a independent study type of class where they get time to work on homework and they get extra help from the teacher, but it's not a special ed service? The school that I'm at, Olathe East, their big philosophy is that they want to do any other type of intervention for that student before having a SPED evaluation. They want to try all the other doors and avenues before slapping a label on a student that they need special services. If after the interventions and accommodations that they could think of that don't involve SPED are not working and the student is still struggling, then they will evaluate them for SPED. The next question I asked was, what's the most challenging part about working with students that have special needs? And from the administrative perspective, she's like a go-getter. She gets things done. And her biggest thing was that it's such a slow process, and she likes to get things done and she likes to have things moving, but just the time it takes for someone to be evaluated and to get all the right little nuances of how that kid can be successful in place is a slow process, and she wishes it could be faster and more concise, and that we need to be doing everything that's good for those kids. And if there's a day that goes by that kid's not getting a service that they need, then we're not serving kids. And I thought that was really cool of her to say, just making sure that she is always prepared with resources and the things that they need as soon as they get the diagnosis. It's just an immediate implementation of those accommodations and modifications. From the SPED and para perspective, a lot of it had to do with student motivation and kids that are lacking that will. They're lacking skill, which is why they're getting SPED services, but then they're also lacking the willpower to actually use the services they're given. Students that don't accept that they have a disability and they don't want to use the accommodations, they don't want a para to help them, they don't want to leave the classroom, they don't want anything read to them, even though they have a disability, that if they accepted those services, this could really help them. And it's really frustrating for SPED teachers and paras when kids aren't accepting of the help and they aren't accepting of the things that they need to be successful, as well as they thought that they don't have enough time with the students, because paras only get to see kids that 1 hour of the day. So Mrs. Kolb is in my Algebra 2 class. She's only with the student that she's with for that hour of the day. She doesn't get to see him again in his resource hours. She doesn't get to work with him outside of class. So she just thought it was kind of frustrating that the only time she has to work with him is that hour, and whatever doesn't get done, she just has to communicate with the special education teacher about it. Another issue from the SPED perspective was that some parents don't believe that their child has a disability. And then there's the other flip side of the coin is the parents that believe that their child has a disability when it is just they're lacking motivation and they're lacking the willpower to do their work and do their assignments. It's not that the kid can't do it, it's that the kid refuses to do it. And trying to figure out what those reasons are isn't necessarily always backed up by a special ed service. It's something that's underlying with that kid, some type of psychological thing that's going on. It's also really hard when parents refuse services and don't accept the help. They want their kid to fight through it and learn to be a quote unquote normal student and be with normal kids all day, but that student could really benefit from services, and the parents just aren't willing to be accepting of that. Then on the flip side, the most rewarding part for the administration perspective was just seeing students turn things around because of some type of service that was implemented. So these kids go to MTSS meetings, they're talked about, they have this plan in place, and then to actually see the plan help the student and the student is successful and the student sees their own success and actually has some type of realization that they can learn and that they can be successful in school, and school is a good, positive place for them to be. Gail was very adamant that this is all about the student. It's student-centered. Every decision we make, everything we do needs to be with student success in mind and what's best for kids. When it came to the SPED and para perspective, especially with the para who works one-on-one with the kid in the classroom, she said mainly it was when students realize something or have that realization of understanding where they had no clue how to solve a two-step equation. But by her standing there talking them through it, then they learn how to do something new. And it just opens up an entire world of positivity towards education, and the kid doesn't hate math. They just thought they were bad at math, so they didn't like it. But now they know how to do it, and they can do it, and they feel confident in themselves. Also, when students work towards their own independence, when they don't need the para to constantly be telling them to get out something to work on, they don't constantly need someone holding their hand, they start taking the initiative and wanting to learn and having that realization of, wow, school is beneficial and I can do this, is very rewarding. Then also from the SPED perspective, it was interesting. Jared was talking about how when students leave the program, that's the most rewarding part, is when they're confident enough to deny services because they know that they want to go to a continuing education program. They want to go to college. They want to go to a tech school. They want to go do something, and they know they're not going to get those services. And so as a junior or a senior, they remove themselves from that resource and go be independent, and they're successful. And that's really rewarding to see. The next question of supervision of SPED staff, from an administration perspective, a lot of it had to do with communication. Gail was all about being present and being there, but not hovering, not being that helicopter administrator that's constantly critiquing everything that SPED and paras are doing, but also creating expectations early and just allow people to do their job. People aren't getting into this field for anything other than wanting to help kids and wanting to do what's best for kids. So we need to trust our staff that that's what they're doing. And if they're not, then there does need to be more open communication and dialogue of how we can best serve kids. Then from the SPED and para perspective, they also were really into communication. They just want to know what the expectations are, and they want someone who's going to be present to collaborate. They don't want someone that's completely hands-off, but they don't want someone that's choking them, hovering over everything that they do. One of the SPED teachers said that everyone who works directly with the student needs to understand the specific needs of the students and the methods of motivating and instructing the student that have been successful. And I thought that was so key, and something that's really lacking is that everyone has their own individual interaction with the student and has their own way of instructing them, but there's hardly ever a time when everyone can collaborate as a team and talk about what's working for them, what's not working for them, and the best ways to motivate the kids. Because that's what it's all about. It's just doing what's best for kids. Also, the para said it would be nice if paras were placed in subject areas that is their strength. So if you put a para in a math class that struggles in math and doesn't understand math, you're setting up that student to not be successful because the student needs help from the para and guidance from the para. While the para's also trying to learn the material, that can be difficult. So if paras are placed in subject areas where they feel they have a strength, then it can be more beneficial to the student. When it comes to working with parents, the administration also went back to communication is key. Gail said it's very important that we have our annual IEP meetings, that updates are always going through with parents of how the kid is doing, how the goals are being met. All of those things revolve around just open communication and working with the parents. The SPED and para perspective also, of course, thought communication was very important. They thought also discussing changes in behavior and changes in abilities and the attitudes that kids bring to school, if they are like starting to get in trouble or they're talking out of turn or they're asking to go to the bathroom all the time, just making sure that there's communication with parents of, are you seeing a change in behavior at home? Or are we the only ones seeing it? Or is it just in this hour of the day? Or has the student, something happened in the student's life that's making them act this way? Getting parent input is very important, as well as with those IEP meetings, the parent is there to advocate for the student and the teachers are there to advocate for the student. Everyone working together is what's best for the student, not what's best for me in my classroom. This kid is acting out because they need special ed services. How can I make my classroom more quiet and more manageable? No, it's what's best for the kid. What does the student need that's going to make them successful? The next question was how they work with regular ed teachers that have special ed students. The administration, Gail was just saying how they need to set clear expectations of how we are to include everyone in that environment. There should be no like, okay, special ed students sit over here and regular ed students sit over here. And we're trying to make everyone in the classroom feel safe and comfortable with who they are, with where they're at. And by doing that and including everyone, the communication becomes a lot easier because the kids are working together. They're not separated and they're not feeling singled out or unsuccessful. It's really important that we follow the IEP and the goals that are on the IEP, so being aware of what those are. The Gail was saying that the communication between the SPED teacher and the regular ed teacher is very important to her. She thinks that in order for a kid to be successful in a regular ed classroom, the special education teacher needs to be knowing what's going on, and vice versa. In order for the special ed teacher to be successful working with the student, they need to know what's going on in the regular ed classroom. She said it was important that the regular teachers are attending IEP meetings so they can have their input on how the student's doing, and just keeping that mindset that all students can learn. She told a story about how she had just had an interview, and the interview was about a kid who didn't like to read, and what would that teacher do if a student didn't like to read and refused to read? And in the interview, the teacher was just like, well, that kid just needs to figure it out and is going to have to do it. We're just going to have to force him to do it. And Gail was like, they immediately lost me. The interview was essentially over after they said that, because typically if a student doesn't like reading, it's because they have some type of reading deficiency. There's something wrong there. And the teacher needs to dig in deep and actually figure out what's going on in order to then adjust or accommodate for that student, where maybe they need a different level of book, or maybe they need to see it on a digital platform, or maybe they can't see very well. Like, just saying the student's going to have to suck it up is not going to be what's best for the kid. When it came to the SPED teachers, They just said that open communication about behaviors and abilities and just the goals that are on the IEPs between the regular teacher and the SPED teacher is really important, and knowing if they're working towards those goals or not. Making